Hey everyone, my guest today is the Tony, Olivier, Peabody, and Golden Globe winner, Robert Greenblatt. Robert is one of the most prolific entertainment producers of our generation. Over the last 30 years, he has overseen four networks, Fox, Showtime, NBC, and HBO. At NBC, he brought us shows like The Voice, This Is Us, Smash, Superstore, and The Good Place, and the live musical productions of The Sound of Music, Peter Pan, The Wiz, Hairspray, Jesus Christ Superstar in Concert, and Annie. From Showtime, he brought us Weeds, Dexter, Shameless, Nurse Jackie, Californication, This American Life, and The Tudors, among others. At Fox, he brought us Beverly Hills 90210, Melrose Place, The X-Files, Party of Five, Ally McBeal, King of the Hill, and The Sopranos. He is currently the lead producer of the musical adaptation of Smash, which comes to Broadway in April 2025. If you opened your playbills for shows like Days of Wine and Roses, Some Like It Hot, The Inheritance, Tootsie, Mean Girls, Dear Evan Hansen, Something Rotten, The Drowsy Chaperone, and 9 to 5, you would also see his name as a producer. I devoured his book, The Rockford Files, Epiphanies in Show Business. I loved it so much. You will too. Welcome to the podcast, child prodigy Bob Greenblatt. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here. Now, I'm exhausted after that bio. I do
I
have a
know.
short version. I should get you that at some point.
No. I love watching my guests cringe because part of accomplishing so much is you have to listen to all the things you accomplished. And this is literally like a thumbnail sketch. It is my absolute pleasure to have you today. It has been so much fun learning about you and your life. You are such an extraordinary person who seems to have found the thing they are passionate about at a very young age, which is rare, and kept going with it. I want to just talk a little bit about what was in the water in Rockford, Illinois, Jody Benson, Joe Mantello, the glorious Meron, just so many people that you knew growing up who you're still friends with, or we lost way too soon.
Yeah.
Talk about just how it all began.
Well, this little town of Rockford, Illinois, is extraordinary. And when we were growing up there, some 50 years ago or something, uh, it is this bustling town about 80 miles outside of Chicago. So it's not a suburb, right? We weren't so close to Chicago, but we were close enough that we could all go to Chicago and see first class national tours of Broadway shows and world class museums and all of that. But we were out in the middle of the cornfields. And, it had a very rich cultural life, this little town, surprisingly, because it was all, blue collar workers, basically. It was a very middle class town, but we had a symphony orchestra, we had a dance company, we had four or five community theaters, we all had high school theater. And for me, it started with high school theater. We had this little Catholic high school that I went to that had this extraordinary drama program and put on these very ambitious musicals. And it was kind of the talk of the town. It's a town of 200,000 people. So it's not, I make it sound like there's, 40 people and a mule stop. But the high school shows were extraordinary. And
There were 200,000 people in a mule stop, I think
yeah,
is
yeah,
what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
yeah. And a little post office and a diner. But we all just wanted to be part of these musicals in high school. So the era that I was there, my best friend was Meron, who, I met literally probably at the auditions for Where's Charlie, a show that your listeners are going to go, wait, I think I know Where's Charlie. It's an obscure Frank Lesser musical that we did my freshman year. And Meron walked in and auditioned, and I was the pianist. I played piano in the orchestras, and I was also working backstage. But I met her, and she opened her mouth and sang with this incredible voice at the age of 14. And I still remember it like it was yesterday. And she had the voice that, she eventually had on Broadway back then. And then I met Joe Mantello. He's a couple years younger than me. And Jody Benson was a year behind me. So by the time I was a junior and a senior, all these extraordinary people were in high school with me. And when we weren't in high school, during the summer, we worked at the outdoor community theater, the Starlight Theater, and did more shows there. So we were doing shows year round at every theater we could work at. Our parents were crazy. They just let us do it. We, of course, all got, good grades, and we were great students, and, we were totally towing the line, but we just got immersed in theater because we had passionate teachers and directors and people in a town who supported it and still do. It was amazing.
I think so much about mentors, like really, I mean, it's sort of there's such a cliche around, well, this is the teacher that's sort of because they saw me, but
Yep.
it really feels like this magical thing where people in that adults understood the level that you could all work at. And was there someone sort of early on that you felt like saw you and just was like, you know what, go as far as you want. I support you. Take over.
Yes. they they all had that attitude about all of us. Some of them had worked in professional theater, in like regional theaters or national tours. So they were not just homegrown theater people. They'd actually worked professionally and knew what that entailed. So they ultimately, came back to Rockford and became teachers in these different schools and programs. But they had been out in the real world, and we knew that they had kind of been to the Emerald City, right? And they had come back to our little town. And so they wanted to make these productions really professional.
Mm.
And there was this attitude that, well, this is just how it is. You make the best version of the show you can. We would rent costumes from New York. We would have elaborate sets built. You had limitations of, actors, local actors and local musicians and all the things that are just, not fully refined yet. But the attitude was go for the most professional version of the show. And we all jumped in with both feet, and they gave us this attitude of, we all started thinking, well, could we do this professionally? Could we go to college? And could we actually do it? And they all just said, absolutely, you can do it. Go for it. Go for it. Now, of course, our parents had something to say about that. And we had to figure out, like, do we go to college? Some of our group, went to college for a couple years. Meron went to college for 2 years in Michigan. She eventually moved away from Rockford, but then she just went to New York. And so there was just this idea planted in all of us that you can absolutely go for it and you can succeed at the top of the profession. You just have to do it. There was no sense of, oh, stay in your little town and keep to your, stick to your knitting. It was go for it. And I don't think without that basic philosophy that was imbued into us, I don't know that I would have done it, or any of us. But we all just thought, okay, how do I do it? How do I do it? And there were also people that had preceded us from our high school and from our town who'd actually gone on to it. So we kind of knew it was possible. There was a woman named Andrea Walters who had done the national tour of No No Nanette. She was from our high school. There was a guy named Mike McDonald who made it into the first international company of a chorus line. Now, that was a new show when we were teenagers. That was the Hamilton of the moment, right?
Yeah.
We knew Mike and Andy had made it. So we were back home, like getting the dispatches from, the front lines of like, we made it, we made it. And of course we would go to Chicago and see them when they toured through the area also. So it was tangible. And we all just went, let's go for it. And there was some of us, myself and another really dear friend of mine named Dan Webster, who was an artist and a designer. He designed our sets in these productions. He wanted to go into the movies. And for me, the movies was like, that's the real, Oz. How do I get into the movies? And none of us had gotten there yet. So for me, it was, I have to figure out, how do I get to Hollywood? How do I get into that world? But at the time, it was all about theater and can we make it on Broadway and can we make it to the real world? And we all just thought, Absolutely. Jodie Benson. I mean, she was starring in Smile with Marvin Hamlish on Broadway, in her early 20s. And Meron had started to work in New York, and she got um, you know, Big River, and she got a job replacing Rapunzel and Into the Woods. And you just sort of people started to work their way into it, and we all were constantly communicating with each other, sending letters. Of course, there was no internet. It was the telegram back then. But I got at this show, and I'm going to do this, and I got cast in this, and summer stock, and it was really the babes in arms. It's like, oh my God, I got a job. And it really was possible. And these mentors, these teachers stayed behind in Rockford, but they were just thrilled with our success, beyond thrilled.
You talk about in the book a moment where, because you were not a Nepo baby in any sense of the
Yep.
word, what did your parents do, by the way?
My dad, who I'm happy to say is still alive and well, had a heating, air conditioning, refrigeration company in Rockford. And my mom, most of my childhood was, a homemaker, but eventually became a travel agent because she had this penchant for travel. And so once we all left home, she became a travel agent. But very basic, middle class kinds of jobs.
But you talk about in your book having a friend, you did get to Hollywood and sort of someone was related to someone. Can you just talk about that for a second?
Yes, I mean, my friend Dan Webster, who, as I said, was our set designer in high school, had a cousin who lived in California. And for me, California was like the moon. Like, oh my God, how do I get to California? Because again, back then, we didn't even fly to places. It's like flying was a luxury. You drove, you went on a summer vacation and the family got in the car and drove. So
Mhm.
California was way out of our range. But one Christmas, time, um, Dan went to visit his cousins in California, and I went along. And his cousin worked at Technicolor, which was on the MGM movie lot, right? I didn't care about Technicolor, but his uncle or his cousin every day went to work at MGM, and so he took us there once. And for me, it was, I mean, I keep referencing The Wizard of Oz, but it was literally arriving at, this magical world and going through the gates of a movie studio and seeing it for the first time up close and personal. And I just knew I wanted to somehow do that. I didn't know exactly what, because I wasn't a performer. I was never on stage. I wasn't a director. I wasn't a writer. I wanted to be a producer, but I didn't know what that was. So I was sort of thinking, oh, is that a stage man? What is that? And
Right.
so I didn't know exactly what, but I knew I wanted to be in the movies. And as a kid, I loved the old MGM musicals. And I'm a musician. So I really thought I want to somehow figure out how to get into movies and do musicals. I didn't realize at the time that, in the mid 70s, musicals were sort of over. It was the past era that I was in love with. But I thought I want to get to MGM and someday make musicals. And then I had to figure out how to do that. But I was more headed towards film than Broadway because again, I wasn't a performer or a director. I didn't know what I would do on Broadway except maybe stage manage. Uh,
Right.
so anyway, I was trying to figure out how to do it, and I eventually went to film school, and that sort of opened up, the doors to into the film business.
Well, you went to many schools.
I went to too many schools, yes.
Went to many schools. But I feel like if you really look at, everything has to happen in a sort of sequential order in order for you to be Bob Greenblatt today, and sort of going to all of those schools and then ending up in this film school where it really had these internships that actually were so meaningful in terms of hands-on experience. And then, I mean, this is such a big jump, but I'm just thinking of you as a kid watching That's Entertainment, that amazing film
Yeah,
about all things magical movie musicals.
yeah.
Then just going with your friend Dan. to
Yep.
like just get to be on a lot, which,
Yep.
is the most extraordinary thing. And I'm just thinking of you. It's like, it feels like Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory. Like there you
Totally.
are in the thing. Um, and then you're actually driving onto a lot, probably not right away with, your own parking spot, but pretty quickly in your trajectory. Um, and in your book, and I'm sorry, you just sent it to me. Like, by the way, I wrote a book. It ends up like I loved your book so much.
Oh, well, thank you. I had some time during COVID, so I thought I would put my memoirs down on paper.
I know, but it's for someone like me who grew up sort of loving the things you loved and actually loving some of the same people you
Yeah.
loved.
Yeah.
Incidentally, we've just found each other later in life. Um, it's just really, it's just well written. Like you're a great
Oh,
writer. You're just a great storyteller. I really went on this ride with you and actually got very excited for all of the milestones that you hit along the way. And also what I loved about the book is your generosity in really shining a light on the other people that you went on this ride with. Um, yeah, it really moved me actually, the team player in you. And I think theater kids understand that really deeply. But I want to talk about Peter Chernin because it sounds like, I mean, you started out working for Scott Rudin, who people
right.
have so many ideas about now, but at that time it was just working for someone making incredible content.
Yeah.
Um, Talk about early days, Scott Rudin, Peter Chernin, what it's like to be young you in that environment.
Yeah. Sorry for the long run on answers, but every one of these topics is like so dear to me. You mentioned this team, this sort of team concept. I do think as a kid doing theater, and it's the same thing you get when you play a sport, right? It's that team thing. And I think the arts, the theater is the flip side of that, which doesn't get as much prominence as, sports in our society, unfortunately. But as a teenager, as a kid forming your whole identity, I was working day in and day out all year round with other like-minded friends who were trying to put on a show and get to the goal line with something. And that attitude of working together and everybody raises everybody else up, to you can't do it without literally hundreds of people being the best that they can be. And we were all in it together from that moment. And I skipped over this really fun moment where, living in Illinois, we didn't go to New York, we didn't visit Broadway, we couldn't get there, it was a luxury. But when we were, seniors in when I was a senior in high school, a bunch of us took a trip to New York to see Broadway shows for the very first time. And it was Dan Webster and Joe Mantello, who was, for me, just a really funny friend and a really good actor, young actor. And we went to Sweeney Todd, was our very first experience seeing a musical in a Broadway theater. And that original production in that theater that now Joe Mantello owns with Wicked, right? All these years later, the Gershwin Theater is where Sweeney Todd originated, which was the Uris Theater. We walked into that theater, and that set that Hal Prince conceived was massive. It was like a movie. For me, it was very cinematic. And I remember walking around the corner and seeing that set for the very first time and just going, wow, the magnitude and scope of what's possible. It just kind of blew my mind. Um, and so, I eventually, found my way to Hollywood, and through film school got this internship at a movie studio, which was the goal. How do I get my foot in the door in a movie studio? And
Right.
I was assigned to work for Scott Rudin at 20th Century Fox. He was head of production then, and he's only a few years older than me. I was in my early 20s, and he was like in his mid 20s, one of the youngest people to ever be the head of production at a studio. And I
Right.
knew that because I'd followed his career as a Broadway casting director. And I just kept somehow, I thought that's the kind of career I want, even though I couldn't quite articulate it. And I was working for him as an intern, and I got to observe, the process of developing and making movies. And I was just an intern, an assistant, but I was in the room with some of these extraordinary people. And Scott was incredibly generous to me during that time. I interned for a year. I was supposed to intern for 8 weeks, and he just kept me on while I was still going to graduate school at night, film school. And after a year, I said to him, I really need to get a job, because as you pointed out, this was my third college degree at this point.
Right.
And I thought, I got to get a real job. And a friend of a friend introduced me to Peter Chernin, who was the new head of production at a studio that is long since gone, named Lorimar. And I went to work for Peter Chernin at Lorimar, and he became my real mentor, and started to kind of take me under his wing. And as his stock rose, and he rose to become one of the greatest, I think the greatest executive in movies in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. But he sort of took me with him to various jobs, or promoted me into jobs at other companies. And I don't think I would have gone as far as I did as quickly without him sort of, tapping me on the shoulder and saying, okay, you get to now rise to the occasion here. And it was an extraordinary gift. And he's a dear friend. I had dinner with him last week, and, I really have to give him credit for so much of my development. I also observed him as an executive and kind of learned from his behavior, and took all the great things, which are his skills. And I like to say that I learned so much from him. And yeah, he was just, I think mentors are great. Not everyone has them. And I got lucky with one of the best you could, hope for.
I don't want to get in the weeds about a time in your life that's many decades
Many
ago,
decades ago.
but 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 actually you look amazing. Um, but can you talk a little bit about, internships can be go get coffee,
Yeah.
and which is a legitimate request as part of an intern's job. But it sounds like in these rooms you were accessing a lot more than running errands for people, that you were being allowed to kind of participate pretty quickly in the process of what they did. When you think back to that time, do you feel like that was because you figured out how to do that in an appropriate way? Like, just how did you understand how to navigate? Those are hard situations for young people first starting out. Do you remember yourself at that time?
I don't really think I do, but
I mean, I know it's been a minute.
I don't know how it happened. It was just very natural.
Uh-huh.
I was invited into this situation. And look, for a while it was, get the coffee, and, set up the room. And, I was doing things that I was thrilled to do, because I was
Sure.
still there, in the middle of
Well,
it
it
all.
was that room you got to set up. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
yeah,
It wasn't me sitting down and, having, story conferences with, Herb Ross or Penny Marshall.
me too.
But Penny Marshall was coming in the door and going into a meeting with one of my bosses at Fox, and, they were making big at the time, and, movies that were ultimately huge hit movies. So I was adjacent to all that, but I just I got to see how it worked, and I got to be a fly on the wall. And sometimes I was in meetings where I heard some real creative stuff going on, but a lot of it early on was just, I was around the periphery, right?
Mhm.
Um, but I'd already gone to college and gotten a couple of degrees, so I wasn't just a, a teenager, sort of sitting in the corner. They knew I was there for a reason, and I came through the USC Film School, which was
Right.
how the
That's right.
internship started. So it's a prestigious, place to come from. So they looked at me as like somebody worthy of being there. And then I just, navigated great relationships with Scott Rudin and Sarah Colleton, who was another film executive who I worked, closely with. And they were they just liked me and wanted me around and wanted me to read the scripts that they were working on and wanted to hear some of my thoughts. Um, and then when I got my first real job, which was with Peter as a low level, story editor, young executive, um, it was my chance to just jump in. And then Peter's the one that opened the door. And I was suddenly sitting in meetings with him and Carl Reiner and people that were making movies for the studio at the time, Stephen Frears. And I was suddenly in there and I was a great sponge. I mean, I just soaked it up. I watched Peter work, I watched the other executives work, and I just sort of imprinted that on my brain and thought, when I'm in that situation, how will I do it? And will I do it this way? And will I have the right things to say? And you just soak it up and hope you have the right people that you're learning from. And it was, for me, it was the perfect storm of all that. I just watched Peter work, and I watched him give notes in a very difficult meeting once to a director who thought his movie was perfect. I won't name the director or the movie because it's for a forgettable film, but
Right.
it's a really prominent director. And he was so sensitive to the director's feelings, but he knew he had to give some real significant notes and try to turn the film around. And I just watched him navigate how to do that. And I thought, this guy knows how to do this, and can I emulate it? And then I just started doing my own work on projects with writers and directors because that was the job I had. And I just started doing it. And I don't know how, but again, I go back to all that theater where we were sitting in rooms as teenagers putting on shows, and we weren't just throwing together shitty community theater. We were actually doing stuff. I did a production as a kid where Jodie Benson played Maria in West Side Story, and Joe Mantello played Chino, and there were some extraordinary people right when I was again, my brain's forming at the time. So it came very natural to me. And then I had to develop my own skills and my own story sense and all that. But um, the formative years were very important for me. They also gave me great confidence to then continue moving forward and quickly moving up that ladder.
Well, I was going to talk to you about that, like the kind of confidence that you had even as a really young person
Yeah.
is not true of everyone. When you think back of sort of like, did you just come out of the womb like that? Do you feel like there was an environment you grew? I mean, you describe parents who were really supportive, but not invested in the same way that you were in storytelling. Uh, like I think a lot as a parent, how much is, environment and how much is my parenting, right? Of our children. Can you talk a little bit about where that comes from in you? And was it always there? And have you ever had a crisis of confidence?
I don't know that I ever did, and I don't know where it came from.
Hmm.
Although I have to believe it was given to me by my parents, who just were very supportive and made me feel somehow that my ideas were valid, and they fostered creativity, even though neither of them were really inherently in the arts. My mom played the piano a little bit. My dad was a little musical, but they just were very encouraging of go after what you want to do and just do it the best that you possibly can. Um, but how did that translate into wanting to tell stories? I don't know. I was always creative. I'm musical from
Hmm.
like a little kid, like a 5, 6 year old. I was sounding out songs on the piano, and so I guess that part of my brain was being developed or nurtured better than the other side. and I don't know, I was always just into the arts, and got into theater right away. I was in a boys choir. Again, Rockford, Illinois had a boys choir, so I was doing a lot of music, and then the theater thing happened, and my parents were just like, "Go for it." They would come to everything, and they were supportive. And again, I got into this group of like-minded friends who were also
Right.
same kind of ambitious young minds, and we all just hived together. Um, so but I had this, the confidence came from, I guess, doing these productions in high school where they were really good. I mean, we have terrible 8 millimeter film of some of these shows, and they're community theater, but some of it's extraordinary. And so we had a sense of like, wow, audiences would come, these shows would sell out. There was a sense of like, oh, achievement was possible. And we would look for the reviews in the newspaper. And, so I don't know, we just got great validation from everyone. And I was never for a second afraid of like, what's my next step? I just was just worried about how do I get the job? Like, how do I get the job? But once I got
Right.
the job, I was never like afraid of how to do it. Again, I had the mentors, I had the people to sort of pattern myself after. And it was a perfect storm of all of that coming together.
Yeah. And as I read, in your bio, I mean, you ended up overseeing four major, I mean, when I was growing up, they were just networks. Now there's a million different kinds of platforms and a lot of different names for them. And you've actually um, evolved with all of them and helped program for all of those places. But the thing that happens when you start working at networks, you're suddenly dealing with a lot of creative people, but you're also dealing with people who are not on the creative side of things. And now you're negotiating and sort of speaking to different sorts of voices and
Yeah.
different, so you also had to do that. And I remember Joe Mantello on his episode, it's so long ago now, I won't remember it exactly, but he was just talking about how from like day one, that trip to New York you mentioned, he
Yeah.
found some sort of like piece of paper with your notes from
Oh
that
yeah.
trip.
Yes. I had planned the trip. I guess I'm the son of a travel agent. So
Yes.
I was like, I'm an organizer at heart, so which I guess
Yeah.
where the stage management comes from, and producers are nothing if not, organizers, right? And I planned the trip, and it's like, what shows are we going to see, and who's seeing what show and what night, and I did the flight arrangements and the planned the all of it, the restaurants we were going to go to, and I typed it up on a memo and made sure everybody had it. And I was 17 or
And it brought you great joy.
yeah, I just thought, how are we going to have the best trip possible? Well, it's got to have to be organized, and we got to know what we're doing. And maybe it was a little overly organized if I think back on it. But yeah, I just had this organizational thinking as a kid. And somehow that meshed together with a creative ability, uh,
Yeah.
which I think is again, the perfect combination if you're going to be a producer or a television executive is a different kind of producer. You're not literally on the set producing it, but you're putting all the elements together. And you know at heart, I'm a creative executive. I put together creative enterprises. I'm not the guy who's going to go to Wall Street and find the investors to build a company and open a new streaming platform, but I'm the guy you want to program it. So there's all those other people around in those situations, the business people and the corporate people and all the stuff to make the factory work. Um, I was always at the heart of it, like, what are the shows? What are the movies? What are the things we're putting together? And how do we market them and how do we make them? That was my lane. But I do, one of my degrees, one of my college degrees is a business degree. So I do have some knowledge of how to talk, to the finance people and the
Right.
other side of the company. But if you hold a gun to my head, the thing I would want to do is make shows, right, as opposed to run a corporation. And the higher up you go in these jobs, and I became the chairman of NBC and the president of Showtime, you do a lot. You just are pulled away from the creative more because you're
Right.
doing more corporate things. But for me, the heart of it is, I'd sit on the set of the live musicals when I was at NBC, but I was the chairman of the company. So that's kind of where my real joy, was. But I had enough of an ability to talk to the business people to rise, in the company to the point where I could have the authority and control the budget to be able to make the shows I wanted to. It was sort of a means to an end. If I'm going to make these shows, the more control I have over the budget and the business side of it, the better. No one said to me, I mean, and on paper, it was the dumbest idea in the world, a live musical. There hadn't been a live musical in 50 some years. No one even knew what they were. It didn't even make sense. And I wanted to do a live musical. And if I hadn't been the chairman of the company and I had to go pitch it to my boss, I don't think I would have gotten a green light for it. So I just was able to do it. Now, I did have a boss who was above me at an even higher level, the chairman of NBC Universal, who had enough confidence in me because we had luckily turned the network around,
Yeah.
where he said,
Just by the way.
yeah, we turned the network around.
Yeah.
I know, we went from number 4 to number 1, which was that's a whole other episode of your podcast. But I went to my boss and said, you know what? I want to try this crazy idea, live musical at Christmas time. And he went, okay, do it. That's the other thing. You need bosses who are going to give you enough rope to hang yourself on one hand or, pull off something no one had done in 50 years.
Yeah.
And I had that too at NBC. A guy named Steve Burke, who I will also mention by name because he was incredible. Peter Chernin suggested to Steve Burke that he hire me at NBC. And so again, the Chernin connection was there, but Steve Burke was an incredible mentor and boss to me during the NBC years when we had to take the company from really last place to first place. And that was, a whole other joyful time. But, Steve Burke made that possible. And I was just given the authority to do it. Now, if Sound of Music had failed, I'm happy to say we had about 20 million viewers live on the night when it, went live. If that had failed, it would have been a very big financial disaster. And I wouldn't have been fired, I don't think, but I wouldn't have been able to make 6 more live musicals. And then other networks started doing them too. And they realized, oh, wait, maybe there is something here that we could take advantage of. But, Steve Burke gave me the chance to take that silly risk. And it paid off. Did I know it was going to pay off? Absolutely not. I had no idea. I was that kid from Rockford, Illinois, who loved MGM musicals. And I thought, you know what? I want to make a musical, a big musical. I didn't have MGM at the time, but I had NBC. So I thought, well, I'm going to just try this. And I had the confidence to do it. And I wasn't worried about the consequences. If it failed, so what? What was it going to do? Would I lose my job? Okay, I'll find another job. I don't care.
Yeah.
I just went for it.
And also, I mean, it would have been 19,999,999, but I watched, so that was the 20 million. We all did, right? Like all of us who love this. And not only that, there are people who loved it. And then there are all these people who just happened to turn on their TV that night because it was event television and fall in love with this art form, even if they hadn't already loved it. So the idea that you have been able to take this thing you love, bring it to an audience that loves it as much as you do, and then bring in a whole new audience who is now learning this thing. It's really, the layers are incredible. And now, I mean, I was such a smash head. I loved that show. And so the idea, that is now going to be just the meta of it all, like the TV show about the making of the musical, and Scott and Mark, who were just the greatest, and your beautiful friend Neil Meron, like you're all going to get to make this thing that we're all very excited about. Not to mention, we talked about this briefly at this party the other night for Neil Meron for his birthday.
Yes.
Sweet soul. my husband had done a play called Take Me Out with Joe Mantello. Joe Mantello is one of my most beloved first New York City actor friends. Um, he did Take Me Out, and then this TV show called Nurse Jackie was being cast. And you told me the other night um, that Joe was sort of a part of Dominic Famusa getting the part of Jackie's husband. Do you remember that?
I remember all of it, and the dots all get connected in a really fun way because Nurse Jackie, I was the head of Showtime at that time, um, and we were looking for something for Edie Falco, who had just come off The Sopranos, and I had a script that was co-written by Linda Wallum from Rockford, Illinois, one of our
Of course.
high
Now
school.
married to Melissa Etheridge.
Yes, now married to Melissa Etheridge all these years later. Linda was one of Joe's best friends and one of my best friends. She did not go to our high school. She went to a competitive high school in Rockford, who also did really good theater, but we did community theater with Linda. And so we were casting Nurse Jackie, the pilot, and we could not really, we'd looked a little while to find the perfect actor to play Jackie's husband.
Kevin.
Yes. And I talk to Joe all the time, and Joe has given me lots of really good casting suggestions over the years. He also suggested to me when I was doing the second season of Smash, and we were looking for new composers to exhibit in that second season. He said, you should try these guys, Pasek and Paul. He had just done Dogfight, their musical.
Yes.
Benj and Justin, who eventually went on to do Dear Evan Hansen and The Greatest Showman. But it was Joe who said to me, these guys are the real deal. They're young, but I think they've got it. And we hired them to write 3 songs for Smash. So I often go to Joe and say, hey, what about this? And what do you think about? And I said, we're having trouble finding the right actor for Jackie's husband. And he, like this, said to me, and the connection was, he had done Take Me Out. He's like, you should look at this guy, Dom Famusa. I think he's great. And he could be, just what you're looking for. Now, I don't think Joe had even read Nurse Jackie's script. So just instinctually, as he does, he was, here's a great actor who you should take a look at. And I think I called our casting directors and said, I've never heard this guy, although I had seen Take Me Out. But I said, let's bring him in. And we did. And ultimately, he won the role. But yeah, it's the smallest world, these communities of theater and film that we live in. And yeah, I mean, we're actually rebooting Nurse Jackie right now at Amazon. We're in the very early stages, so we don't know if it's going to go forward yet, but we're writing the sort of continuation of Nurse Jackie today. And we'll see what that yields, but we may need Kevin in there again at some point too.
Well, it's so crazy because this is not a lie. On Friday, Dominic and I were at the post office, and postal workers obsessed with Nurse Jackie. You go to a hospital, it's great to have Dominic with you. I mean, there's certain shows that
so funny.
Yes. And the postal worker said to me, you are Nurse Jackie's husband's wife. And I was like, yes.
I love it. That's your new role.
Yes, I am. I am Nurse Jackie. I guess it had streamed again it had been, I mean, that show was a long time ago, and everyone was watching it again. And I'm honored to be Nurse Jackie's husband's wife.
Well, it's only been off the air for like 10 years. And so we're really excited to bring it back. But, you're right. That show, that character really hit home with a lot of people. And, when it first came out, there was a whole faction of criticism about like, oh, it's making nursing look terrible. And she's, a drug addict, or she's an addict and she's a nurse. So you're bringing down the profession. And just the opposite really happened when the show premiered. Nurses loved this character because she was an extraordinary nurse, right? And she had issues she was grappling with. And there is a faction of nurses who struggle with these very same things. So it's very relatable for millions and millions of people. And the great Edie Falco was part of that. But
I think she
just
brings such incredible, the thing about Edie, who I've known for so long, speaking of long-term friends who I love so much, the humanity that she manages to bring from Carmela to Jackie to everything she does on
yeah,
stage, on screen, is create a reality like this is a full person. And she does it so quietly. She's the quietest actress in terms of process. You see no process, and then you watch it and you're like, this is the Michelangelo of
yeah.
actors. Like she's an incredibly beautiful person, and that's thrilling. And I can't wait to see. I think a lot about what that person's future would look like with the realities career and how the show ended and the question mark about the ending. That is
Yeah.
very exciting. And what a fun part of your life and job to get to figure out those puzzle pieces.
Well, yeah, and now I'm on the producing side of it, which is really fun. And even though I was the president of Showtime when we did the show. Again, this is my personality. I was very involved in that show creatively with Linda Wallem and the co-creator Liz Brixius. And so I feel like I was like one of the producers even when I was just at the network. So now we're producing it, and we'll see. I mean, Jackie obviously she had a very the ending of the series was she was going down the drain almost literally. I'm happy to say that she survived. Um, she wasn't kind to Kevin at the end. It wasn't so good between her and her husband by the end of the series, but I think it'll be fun to see where we pick her up at. And
Yes, yes. Well, they started out, that's the tragedy and the reality. Like,
yes,
they started out a loving family and then things happen. And how you heal that is, I think, what people want to see, right? Like everyone
yeah,
gets a second chance. Anyway, I want to just say that that's exciting. I also just read that there's a Studio 54 musical
yes.
coming up, which is also a thrilling idea. And how has that never been done before? I also just want to mention one thing that I want to know, like your take on it. When I sort of did a deep dive into you and your life as we finish up, so many of the headlines about you would say first gay network president, first gay head of this, head of that. And I never saw you leading with that when I would read as much as other people leading with that in sort of their description or their pride, or people want ownership of someone who feels like them. I wonder if you can just speak to a minute about that.
Yeah, I never led with that. But I will say when I got into the Hollywood system, uh, it was immediately apparent to me how inclusive that was.
Mhm.
I could be who I was, and I didn't have to really hide anything. And one of the first, jobs I had when I rose into the ranks at Fox, the Fox Broadcasting Company, was Barry Diller, right? Who was the chairman of the Fox company then. And we knew Barry was gay, and he was sort of a role model on some level.
Right.
And David Geffen, and there's always been some really prominent gay show business, titans. But it was never an issue for me, and I didn't feel in the 90s is sort of when I grew up in Hollywood, the need to stand on a platform. Um, but there was a lot of up and coming and prominent gay people in the business. It just wasn't spoken about that much. And then things progressed with gay marriage, and all kinds of things kind of really went in the right direction. And I hope they stay in that direction as the future of our country unfolds. But there weren't a lot of heads of networks or studios who were gay. There were a handful. So when I became the president of Showtime or the chairman of NBC, I was one of few. Casey Bloys, who's now the head of HBO and Max, is gay, and Carolyn Strauss, who was at HBO, was gay, and Cindy Holland, who was at Netflix and did all that great early programming, is gay. So there's a number of us, but still very much in the minority, and not that many as the heads of companies. So I guess it stuck out to people when I had some of those prominent jobs, and I was happy to be described that way. But for me, it was never, the first issue to be talked about. I mean, it's so clear. All I was doing was musicals. So, did anyone have any question about any of it? But yeah, I'm proud of it. And I again, I hope that we stay very pro LGBTQ plus in our world, even though it seems to be, there seems to be some kind of change in the air. But yeah, I'm very proud of that.
You've been doing this, as we said, for a long time. What is the thing that still makes you want to do it? Some people are like, I've done all of this. I've always wanted to be a therapist, and I'm going to go back and do that. Like, what is the thing? What is the thing that when you wake up every morning, you're like, I get to do this? And
Well, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people say this, but I don't know that there's anything else I could do or would be qualified to do.
good at.
Um, but I guess there's nothing more thrilling to me than, seeing the final product, when you have a show and it's you've finally done it, and you sort of put it out to the world. There's nothing more joyous than whether you're in a live theater and hearing and seeing it completely polished, right? Whether it works or doesn't work creatively for the audience, just the thrill of putting all those millions of little details together into the finished product is really thrilling for me. Seeing the final version of a TV series or of a pilot or a show is really thrilling. And no two shows are alike, and each one's a new set of challenges. Sometimes the behind the scenes challenges are annoying, financially, or if you have issues with personalities or whatever. I don't love all that. I love, yeah. But I guess getting to the finished product and seeing it started with nothing, basically. You start with literally a blank page, unless you're doing a revival, and that's a different kind of joy. But, you start with nothing, and then it's slowly built out of all these layers. And then it's presented to the world as a completely finished thing. And most people look at it and just they don't look at the layers. They just look at the finished product, and it moves them, or it makes them fall out of their chairs with laughter. And they have no idea what went into it or how difficult it was. And that's really, I don't know a better thrill than that.
Yeah. And
you've been in.
I know. I think if I could change one thing, I was thinking about how movies and television, there is not one review that like makes or breaks the thing. And that in theater, we're still in a like tradition where there's this, I mean, word of mouth is still an extraordinary way to keep something open. And it does work, and social media is a whole new animal, and we're learning it, you and I who didn't start out on, but really, like, there is nothing like all of these people coming together in a room. I mean, live theater particularly, and I would say the one thing that kills me, even if I'm not in the thing, I will read a review and it'll just kill me just knowing that what was not mentioned is like all the good intentions, right? Like the thing that went into this was made from love. And anyway, that's a whole other conversation. I wish we could change that one piece, although it is what it is.
I think we all have to we all have to just accept that, and I think we do.
Hmm.
You know, at the end of the day, you just you for me, and Joe and I have talked about this a lot. It's really about the process and the joy of the process, and you hope you build something where you're doing it with people you love and in a really loving way, and nurturing and supportive, and you get the joy out of that, and then you present it to the world, and the world either loves it or hates it or
Or
shrugs
is neutral.
or just whatever.
Right.
Uh, and we can't control that. And of course, we, as human beings, we want them to love it, and we want it to be completely, reinforced that we're geniuses. But all you can do is just put it together and love the process, and then, you hope you build a Hamilton or you hope you build a Wicked. But I could name a dozen things that for me were not hits that I just loved working on,
Hmm.
and that's as meaningful as the big hits.
Well, I cannot believe, as I mentioned, just maybe half of the things that your thumbprint is on, like the amount of content that I've absorbed that moved me or made me laugh. I mean, your taste, you just have really incredible taste, and it has brought so much depth and joy and a balm to my soul over my adult lifetime. So I don't always get to say thank you to the creators and the producers personally. Part of doing this podcast is the joy of saying thank you to people whose work has been so meaningful to me and the people I love, and healing. And during COVID, I don't know what anyone would have done without it. So Bob Greenblatt, thank you for your integrity and your taste and the way you work. It's a really
Well,
good roadmap for the rest of us. So thank you.
thank you for saying all that. I mean, I am really only as good as all these, like I say in my book, all these incredible artists that I've had the pleasure to work,
Yeah.
and being in the room with, a Joe Mantello for the duration of a musical, like 9 to 5, the musical which we did together. And ultimately it wasn't, creatively, it was creatively a thrill for us, but commercially it wasn't the long running hit that we all hoped it would be. Um, but being in the room with him, and Dolly, and Megan Hilty and Allison, that whole group, and I know how close you are to Allison. I mean, that for me was a joy, and we're all sad that it didn't become one of the longest running musicals in history, but we all loved being together for those 2 years doing it, and wouldn't give it up for anything. So you're only
And
as good as your
I saw it multiple times because of Allison
yeah.
and Stephanie J. Block and everyone else in that show that I loved. Um, and people, you know, this may not be known, and as history goes forward, like people fell out of their chairs,
Yes.
like the joy and the laughter, like it was unbelievable to be in that audience. So you also did that, like you know that you were there, you experienced that there was nothing like the infectious, contagious joy that spread throughout that theater. So you did that, like you're a part of that. No one can take
Yes.
that away. Yeah, it
No,
was
the
amazing.
the uproarious laughter every night at that show was like painful in a good way. Like your body
No, like you
is
would get,
stitches.
yeah, like it was face cramping, like
Yeah.
you would pull a muscle in your thing. Speaking of that and all the other things, you have many things to work on. So I know I have to let you go, although I do it sadly, and I hope you'll come back one
I'd love.
million times because it's such a scratching the surface with you, my friend. But is there a little known fact that you can share before we say goodbye?
Well, yes. There's one, and it may not be that little known, but I think it's little known outside our little world. But I had the pleasure to work with Dolly Parton on 9 to 5, and then subsequently some TV projects at NBC. And at the NBC upfront, when we were doing her first movie, The Coat of Many Colors, I asked her to come out in front of the advertisers and just promote the upcoming movie, which was, 6 months away. And we did it at the Radio City Music Hall, right? Which is where the NBC upfront usually is, which is this big presentation in front of, ad buyers. And I asked her to sing at that event because I figured I would just have the crowd in the palm of my hands if she would actually sing. Because, Dolly is the Dolly.
Dolly Parton.
Yes, she's the institution of Dolly. And she said to me, and we had done 9 to 5 a few years before, and she knew I was a pianist, and she said, I will sing if you will accompany me on the piano. And I was, the chairman of the network, and I was doing the presentation basically for the advertisers. But I thought, you know what? Why not? This would be a real lark for me personally. And so we did that. And she sang I Will Always Love You in front of that crowd of advertisers. And it was me at the piano. And it's one of my most treasured moments. And it was just so much fun to do it with her. And I think it's a little known fact outside of the circle of, the people who were there that day.
That's incredible. Also, of all her songs, there's an intimacy in that song between her and the pianist. So the idea that like you duetted in that way with her, the most beautiful song in Radio City. Like think of little Bob Greenblatt like playing at the piano in Rockford, and there you are, also head of the network, not hired to like just play the piano that day. Well
Right.
done, you.
It was, it's
Surreal.
seared in the memory. And I also remember Brian Roberts, who's the chairman of Comcast, NBCU, the owner of the whole company, didn't know I was going to do it. And he was in the audience that morning. And he came running backstage after it was over. And he was just kind of blown away. He goes, oh my God, you killed it. You killed it out there with Dolly Parton. And, that was a fun moment also. But yeah, I mean, I who doesn't love Dolly? I just,
No, a monster person. That would really be who'd have to be. Well, like your friend, the president of the network or head of said, you killed it. Like Bob, you've really killed it. Like in every lane, you've killed it. And I cannot wait to see like what the next 50 years bring and beyond. And thank you for being on Little Known Facts today. What a thrill to have you. What
a joy to do this with you. I'm so happy to be part of the many, many illustrious people you've had in your lineup. And, I'm so happy that we have the Dominic connection also.
I know, it's such a small world. It's such a small podcast.
Yeah.
Travel safe. Hopefully I'll see you in New York very soon.
I'm sure you will. Please come to Smash.
I
we should
will.
have more time on Smash, but maybe another time.
Well, we will. I mean, Scotty's been on, but I thought it would be really fun to just do a Smash. We're going to do a Smash.
Oh, we'd love that. Yeah.
I've been obsessed. I'm obsessed. All right. Bye, sweetheart.
Okay,
Thank you. Have a great day.